Hi Kittkat06. This is a video response to your video response to me on the video I made about human gods. First of all, let me say that I'm sorry I didn't have time to post this yesterday, so I have to do it today instead. Things got a bit hectic yesterday. So yes, and also if I ever seem to be reading something, it's because I've made some notes when I watched your video about things I wanted to address. I really enjoyed your video response, so thank you for that. So let's get on with the reply. First, you comment on me mentioning that the Dalai Lama as a god, and let me clarify what I mean there. I'm not saying that he is a god in the traditional sense of a god, nor that he should be or wish to be worshipped. However, he is a divine persona within Buddhist religion. He is more than, you can say, the Pope, because the Pope is considered to be, yes, the word of God on earth, but he is a man who is then chosen to the office, while the Dalai Lama is considered to be the reincarnation, the direct reincarnation of a bodhisattva. He is considered to be the reincarnation of the bodhisattva of compassion, and I'm probably going to mangle this name because I am horrible with such pronunciations, but Avalokitesvara. So while he is a man, and he definitely have asked not to be worshipped, he is considered to be a direct reincarnation of a divine persona. That is what I mean about it. And also, Jesus in the Bible several times says, "Don't worship me, don't worship me." And I find it then a bit strange that Christians constantly do, but that's a video for another time. Yes, I do understand that concept of three gods in one, but yeah, like I said, video for another time. Alright. So, I completely agree that the way we worship has changed a lot over the times, and it is not possible for us to completely pick up where the ancient cultures left off and worship in the exact same way. Because, for example, in Norway, it's been this discussion about, for example, animal sacrifice. Let's say Norse religion, they had Blut on several times a year, where an animal was slaughtered as a sacrifice. The blood was sacrificed, and then the meat was eaten in a great feast to the gods. This is not possible to do by Norwegian law because it has very strict rules, and I think it's a good idea that I have very strict rules on this, on how an animal can be slaughtered. But that's just an example. So yes, of course we have to modernize our practice, but I completely agree with you that at times modernizing your beliefs too much, then there's not much left of the religion you are trying to practice. And of course, for me, who are not adhering to a particular religion but are eclectic, this is a bit easier because I'm not trying to reconstruct an ancient religion. I am picking and choosing the part that is right for me. But I think it's a bit strange those that try to reconstruct, who then ignores many of the beliefs of these ancient cultures that were shaped by the religions they try to honor and the gods they try to honor. So yes, I definitely agree that you have to do the best you can with what you have in modern society, and practice have to be changed to fit modern society. but beliefs doesn't necessarily have to be changed. Of course, it evolves as humanity and our own consciousness evolves, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the beliefs themselves, the core elements of those beliefs, evolves. So I completely agree with you on that. And the next point, yes, when I'm talking about human gods, I sort of fit them into three different categories. You have reincarnations, like for example, very often in the Egyptian culture, people who were considered to be living gods, that being human beings who were seen as gods, were considered to be reincarnations or incarnations, if you will, of a god. So they were that god given flesh. This is also one of the concepts which many Christians believe is the case with Jesus, that Jesus were not a separate entity from God, but were the Jahwe given flesh. So this is one of the concepts, and I think that this is one of those that are often ignored the most, like for example the pharaohs, who were believed to be an incarnation of Horus on earth. And I think that for many people, the idea that a human being can be a god in flesh is very alien. Now, the second category are, of course, the demigods, those that are born of a human and a god parent. And I think a few more bring those into the equation, especially those that are part of the mythology, like for example Hercules, and so on, because they are very much part of the mythology, and besides Hercules do quite a few things that is, if you excuse the term, godly. For example, he creates the Milky Way when he tosses milk from his bottle. So yeah, but that, going from that to including other people who were believed to be demigods, I think that's a bit more alien for many. And then you have divine personas, and it's here that, for example, the Dalai Lama fits in, or for example the Hishen in Taoist culture, which is basically holy Taoist immortals, and so on. People who, saints would also go into this category. People who, for some reason, are either blessed by the gods, touched by the gods, and their natures is, they are definitely human. They are not gods per se, but in a way they are divine. If you understand, I guess I express myself a bit poorly here, but if you look at a saint, they would be considered to be so pious, such an amazing follower of the given religion, that their very nature would make them, in many ways, divine. They would no longer be just human, but they would get a divine element. And the same with other religions' versions of divine personas. So, yes. And then of course you also have spirits. And some people consider spirits to be gods, and others consider them not to be. And take for example in Shintoism, where while they have a lot of creatures that are definitely gods, a very big part of the pantheon are their own ancestors, the ancestral spirits. And then you definitely have humans who have become gods, because these people were flesh and bone human beings once. So these are sort of the categories, 3+1 category of human gods, the way I see it. And I think that some of these are easier for people to swallow than others. So I think it's easier for a modern pagan to think, okay, I will include my great aunt in, or the forefather of my bloodline in my worship, than, for example, okay, than, for example, the Tsar of Russia, who were actually canonized and made into a saint. Of course, then we are talking Christianity, and most pagans don't include that, but just to make an example, many of the kings of the ancient world who were considered to be, while not everyone were considered to be actual offspring of the gods or reincarnations of the gods, most were considered to be divine personas. And I think that's a much more difficult concept to grasp than a human being can become a spirit who, or for example, the demigods who are very much a part of the mythology. Yes. Then you discuss the concept that many have, what if they were lying? And now I have to speak from my religious perspective here, which is different than yours, and to me it doesn't matter, because to me, I definitely agree that if you look at it literally from one of the ancient religions, then it would probably be some hefty punishment in it to claim divine birthright if you didn't have it. However, I also think that it doesn't matter, because I think that in many ways worshippers create the gods, that when people have been worshipped as gods and have been sort of in the collective subconsciousness accepted as gods, then in very many ways they are. So that it doesn't matter if Cleopatra is a reincarnation of an Egyptian god or not. I lean toward thinking that she is, but even if she isn't, her legend, if you will, how she has become such a part of our culture so many centuries after her death, makes her in many ways divine. So for me, it doesn't really matter. But of course, I only pick those gods that speak to me, and definitely not all of these divine personas and so on do. But yeah, I think that it doesn't matter that much if they're lying, because their legend make them divine, even if they might not originally have been. And yes, and when it comes to including everything in your worship, of course I didn't mean including every god in your worship, because there are quite a few, and especially then for me who are multi-religious. So yeah, you have all the ones in the Greek and the Roman and the Egyptian and the Norse pantheons, and you have quite a few of them there. And then of course you also have, if you look at Shintoism, you have many thousand gods. And the same within many of the other Oriental religions. So yeah, there are quite a few thousand gods. And of course I don't go and list all of these names. What I meant about including them in your worship is more acknowledging them as gods. Even within the ancient cultures, people didn't, at least the everyday man and woman, did not list all the gods' names every time they worshipped. Most had patron deities, which were often based on which part of the world they lived in, and then they worship based on season and based on what need they might have at the time. But these different demigods, divine personas, and so on, and all the lesser gods, not to mention them, were part of the greater pantheon. They were acknowledged, even if they might not have been mentioned by name. I of course do not say that you should list every god in a pantheon, not to mention every god in every pantheon, because then you would not do anything else. But there's a difference between completely ignoring them, as many pagans do, and sort of including them in every worship. For me, I have considered making a ritual that I will practice, I think, once a year. Just choosing a proper date and doing that ritual once a year, which then honors all the gods I don't usually honor, just to include them in my practice. But of course this is a personal choice, nothing I think that everybody should be doing, but I have felt the need to make such a ritual, so I think I will be doing that. And then we get to human-like gods and the nature of gods. So yeah, I think that when I said praying to the more human-like gods, what I meant was that, for example, I think that a demigod, like for example Alexander, will have an easier time understanding what it is to be human than a god who has never had a human condition. I also think that a lot of, when you look at pantheons, some have very esoteric gods. Like, for example, Christianity, with Yahweh having no beginning, no end, and really being undefinable. And on the other end, you have, for example, the Norse religion, where the gods were very much flesh and blood. Yes, they shapeshift. Yes, they have magical powers. And yes, they can do some serious whoop-ass. And they had a huge part in the creation of the world. But they are still flesh and blood beings. To me, I think perhaps the Greek-Roman pantheon fall a bit in the middle of this. They are more personified than, for example, Yahweh. But at the same time, they are definitely esoteric in nature, or at least the way I look at them. And no, I do not think that their human forms, the forms that are described as their typical human or animal forms, are their true natures. I think that they very much are spiritual in nature. However, I think that they are more defined and perhaps closer to human, or at least closer to being able to understand the human nature than, for example, Yahweh, who are completely esoteric. I guess I don't explain this very well either, but I hope you get what I mean. And when it comes to the nature of gods, I think that if you're going to consider what gods to include in worship and what the gods to acknowledge as gods in a pantheon, you have to discuss what is a god. And I think this is a very floating concept, because various religions have had various ideas of what a god is. To me, a god is a powerful spiritual being. And it has to be able to in some way further worshippers' spiritual development. So anything that is able to further the spiritual development of those who honor them, and who is very powerful and have a spiritual nature, to me could qualify as a god. But like I said, various pantheons have various ideas of what a god is, so it's very difficult to set a direct this is a god. So to me, it's more like looking at what pantheon I'm working at. So the Greek Romans do acknowledge demigods as gods. The Egyptian pantheon acknowledges the pharaohs, who are reincarnations of Horus, as gods. So if I'm working with those pantheons, I acknowledge them as gods. While let's say I'm working with the Christian pantheon, I might not consider the angels to be gods, even if they are powerful spiritual beings who can further my spiritual development. They are not considered gods within that pantheon, so I might not acknowledge them as such when working with that particular belief system. Of course, this again comes back to me being a chaos magician, so I change my paradigms and my belief systems quite often and use several of them after what I feel like and what I need at the moment. But I think that if someone has a set belief system, then they should look at the entirety of that pantheon, including those gods which might be alien to our modern way of thinking. And the last point I wanted to address were the idea that human beings would die if they would gaze upon the gods. This is a common element in a lot of religions. For example, in early Judaism, you had a spiritual movement who were the forerunner to the Kabbalah, which were called, translated, I think it will be the Merkaba Riders. And the whole concept of their spiritual system was to purify their souls and develop spiritually until they got to the point where they would be allowed to gaze upon the throne of God and die in that state. So this is a common spiritual belief, and I think that the gods is so overwhelming. They are so alien from us and so much more powerful than a human being that I do think it can overwhelm the senses and kill us. Exactly why, I don't know. Perhaps it's because gazing at such a creature would develop us so much spiritually that our bodies can no longer contain us. Or perhaps it is just a physical thing that, just like it is possible for a human being to die of shock, that seeing such a creature who is so different from us would shock us to such a degree that it's a big chance that our system would go into shock. But I tend to lean more toward seeing a god, actually seeing the true nature of a god would develop us so quickly that this mere flesh could no longer contain us. So yes, that's my video response to you. It has run a bit long because, unlike you, I'm not very good at restraining myself when talking and staying within 15 minutes. So yes, I really loved your video response. I hope you have a great day and a great weekend. Blessed be. Bye!